this is Joe Pardavila, and thanks for joining me on ForbesBooks Radio. You know, work culture is constantly in flux. There's AI, the gig economy, demographic and social shifts, and of course now, a pandemic. And here to talk about the future of work environments is the co-founder and co-CEO of Artefact, Rob Girling. Rob, how are you?
Hey, Joe. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. Now, first of all, Rob, full disclosure, I Googled you and I was blown away when I found out that you were the person that created Clippy, animated paperclip assistant for Microsoft Office back in the 90s. I'm old enough to remember Clippy. Is that sort of like the bane of your existence that even comes up in a Google search or anything like that?
That's your Google skills really showing off there, because that's actually that's kind of a best kept secret type, only disclosed in emergencies kind of.
Oh, okay.
Situation. Yeah. But no, we can talk about that if you want.
Did I out you about Clippy, or is this something you just don't like to talk about? If this is uncomfortable, Rob, we'll stop right here.
It's very uncomfortable. I'm very awkward right now, just squirming a little. It's funny that that's probably going to there'll be a picture of Clippy on my tombstone, I think, just basically saying, can I help you now or something, Isn't
it scary that all of you've accomplished in your life, and you're talking about your tombstone, and without getting too dark, but your obit, the first or second line is probably going to mention Clippy, right?
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Yeah, I wish the young designer that was wet behind the ears and a greenhorn working at Microsoft back in the early 90s had enough wherewithal to see that was going to be a dead end, technologically speaking.
It's funny because now, you say it was early 90s. There are people alive, and a lot of them who are actively on computers, social media, who have no idea what Clippy is. So, that must make you feel better that there's a whole generation of computer users and people online who have no idea what Clippy is. So that must make you feel better.
I'm very happy about that. Yeah.
All right.
Don't look it up, people.
Don't look it up. Yeah. Delete the first 5 minutes of this. It doesn't really matter. So let's jump a couple decades, Rob, from Clippy to your role now as co-founder and co-CEO of Artefact. What happened along the way there?
I graduated in 92, and I was one of the first generation of designers trained to think about interaction design, which was a kind of new idea that somebody had to design the experience of working on new technology. What was it going to be like to experience and do work and be productive with technology? And there was very few of us. I got flown out from England for an interview at Apple and worked at Apple for a little while, then went to Microsoft. I did 10 years there trying to figure out how to do this new design discipline, which was kind of user interface, user experience design. And it was a very exciting time. The world we didn't really know what we were doing as designers. We sort of made it into a discipline over the 30 years that I've been doing it. But we sort of blended together these ideas about psychology and understanding what people really want and what their unmet needs are, and then trying to design experiences that were really kind of exciting and powerful to use. So that was kind of the journey. I started my own consultancy after leaving Microsoft. I went to work for Sony for a little while doing game design.
So you only work for crappy companies, it sounds like. Apple,
yes.
Microsoft. So just the bottom of the barrel companies in your career. You probably should choose better than that there, Rob.
Yeah, one of the best experiences was actually at a company called IDEO, which is probably the most famous design consulting company in the world. They were very formative in helping form the discipline that I do, interaction design. So I spent a little time there, and then I was like, why am I doing it for them? I'd start my own consultancy, and so that's what we did. My business partner Gavin and I started Artefact back in 2006, and the story gets more interesting and complicated from there on.
So tell us about the scope of your work at Artefact right now. What's the gist of it? You got an elevator pitch. How would you describe it to people?
Yeah, so we're essentially a strategy and design consulting company. That basically means we craft strategy to help companies face the future with all of the different technological trends and things that are going on. And then we help them actually craft innovative product and service experiences, mostly software, sometimes hardware. And we try to do that through the lens of how can we impact things responsibly. You've seen how the sort of stock value of technology over the last few years has taken a bit of a dip. And I don't mean financially, I mean in terms of societal support. We're all very skeptical now about how technology is impacting us in society. What Artifact's trying to do is try to be optimistic about what technology can bring for us, but really try to think about the impact we're having and try to create a more equitable and sustainable future. So that's how we think about what we do specifically and how it's different to other companies like us.
Now, your company's been around for, I think, nearly 15 years.
Yep.
How have you guys evolved since the beginning? Because when you started, mobile phones didn't have anywhere near the capability that they do now. What kind of steps did you take along the way to, fast forwarding from the beginning to 15 years?
Yeah. So, it's been a crazy journey. We were a year before the iPhone came out. It was a very different time. Design had not found its place quite as an important discipline in corporate America. It was very much kind of the heyday for consultants in some ways, because the internal capabilities in most organizations weren't very sophisticated. There was a few outliers like Apple and Nike that were incredibly good at design. But when I joined Microsoft, for example, it was, I think, 15 designers in a company of 30,000 people at that point. That changed. Now, there are thousands of designers at Microsoft, and now it's sort of a key discipline. So in the 15 years we've been around as a company, you've seen this remarkable transformation where design thinking and design crafting in user experience really exploded as a sort of critically important kind of asset for innovative companies of all kinds.
Was there a watershed moment for that? Because you said you went from 15 designers to thousands.
Yeah.
Was there like a aha moment that said, "Oh, this is the wave. This is how things have to change. We have to lean more on design"?
Yeah, I think the influence of Steve Jobs can't be sort of overlooked historically here in terms of just how Johnny Ive and Jobs basically forged a relationship through multiple products, multiple kind of innovative moments in consumer electronics where they just blew the socks off the competition, changed the game. And design was largely heralded as being the kind of catalyst for that. It's actually a more complex story than, of course, there's been one hero in the building. But if anything, Apple was just really good at executing on all fronts and leading with design and marketing as being kind of incredibly powerful instruments. That really was the backdrop for the sort of steady drip, drip, drip realization with the rest of the tech industry that design really did matter and was kind of incredibly powerful as a shaper of new products.
It makes sense because if I like to joke, and probably, I'm no expert when it comes to technology, but I always say that, Apple never does anything first. They didn't create the first iPhone, the first tablet. They never did the first laptop. They just made them better. And they did it through design, theoretically, right? That was their big thing. They just made it super user-friendly. It looks sexy. Everyone wanted a piece of it, even though they could probably get something that's cheaper and doesn't look as good. The design isn't as great, but you just, the design of Apple, for some reason, they just had that magical touch and still do to this day.
Yeah. Maybe slightly less. They've lost their game slightly, but it was also their engineering. They just, from a hardware engineering point of view, their sort of technical innovation and manufacturing expertise and just all of the things that it takes to do these things amazingly well. That attention to detail was just blew everyone away in terms of just how good they got at it and are at it in general.
Your life in tech is kind of amazing because you got in really early in the game because you were there pre-Windows 95, right?
Yeah.
All these technological advancements like the Apple exploding and online. Is it weird now? Can you remember the days where, dial-up internet, again, going back to people not knowing what dial-up internet is, how far we've come along in such a short period of time? It's only 20 years. It's basically one generation.
Yeah, one thing that's been consistently true about our discipline is how just constantly bombarded with change we are. So we've become very kind of desensitized, I think, to how rapidly things are shifting because we're always looking out at the next new thing, the next new paradigm, the next challenge. And in user experience design, those just keep coming. It's like if it's not conversation one year with Alexa and the rise of smart devices, it's it's virtual reality the next, or augmented reality the next, or it's AI and the power of that, and then it's ethics. And every year there's a kind of a new thing for us to kind of grapple with and understand and try to sort of keep at the forefront of what we're doing, and weave it all together into a kind of big understanding of how to do this stuff.
All right, last question on this point, because I know some people say that tech is essentially, you guys are the Wild West out in Silicon Valley. Should the government be more involved? How do you see it evolving? Like, do you see there being some sort of government regulation, like an FCC for the internet? I mean, there's sort of bodies like that, but now like a more stringent company that oversees what's happening with internet companies.
Yeah, so California's taken the lead in the US with this new Data Protection Act, which is modeled after the European GDPR, which went into effect a couple of years ago. So the Europeans were the first to kind of legislate like some actual protections for us consumers, with privacy, the right to be forgotten, essentially, and all of these kinds of mandates that went into effect a couple of years ago. So that is happening globally. So for global companies, they're already kind of operating in that world. Although in the US, it is very much the Wild West, as you said, except California, which is trying to get out of the starting gates, new legislation modeled after GDPR, the California Data Protection Act, I think is. And the federal government needs to adopt something similar. And I think a lot of the Democratic nominees were talking about the need for that. The other thing that could happen in tech that needs to happen is there needs to be some recognition that a lot of these organizations are monopolies and becoming too powerful in terms of it would be better to break up Amazon into its cloud service and its kind of delivery service. It would be better for business. It would be better to have some of these things disaggregated. These would be better for consumers. These are better for the economy. There's no question this aggregation of power is a little bit terrifying.
All right. So let's talk about, the world we're living in now. How do you run meetings? We were talking about, the fact that technology has come a long way. Are there any differences between, how people are, especially maybe in your company or people that you know of now, as opposed to, pre-pandemic? Are we sort of now in this world where going forward, this work from home structure is going to be more and more prevalent?
It's a good point. I think COVID is basically accelerating us into the future. You can think of it basically as being kind of an accelerant to all of the things that were slowly happening kind of organically. It's just put like gasoline on that. We're just being propelled forward. I think a lot of companies have realized, how seamless it was to basically transition to almost a completely virtual, and I'm talking mostly about knowledge workers here, people who work on laptops, how easy it was for them to transition to Zoom or other platforms and continue to get work done. And that has basically, and I'm an employer as well, speaking as the CEO here, like the effortlessness of that transition, it's blown the doors off all the old arguments for why you needed office space and why it was so important for everybody to congregate in one place. And those things are all kind of dying quickly, I think. And so we're embracing this new world. And I think what we're going to see is like an inversion. Now it's normal for you to go to the office and then occasionally work from home. I think we'll just see the inversion of that. Like it'll be mostly if you want to get work done, you work from home. And then occasionally you come to the office for community, for like those big meetings where it's really important to make eye contact with people. And you need that kind of human to human kind of full bore, full intense interaction. And for fun and for a sense of belonging and all of the things that humans do need that aren't well served by, digital technology.
I'm going to blow up my company spot because they were very concerned about people working from home and whether things were going to get done because, luckily the company offered if you were with them for more than a year, you were able to work from home one day a week, which is great. But, as we were going through this pandemic, a couple times the upper management were like, we're just so proud of how everybody's just pulling their bootstraps and working hard from home. We just didn't know what to expect. So it's kind of funny how the human nature of everyone being like, oh my God, if no one comes to the office, no work is ever going to get done.
Right. Yeah, that essential trust that management have that basically all their employees are just a moment away from goofing off and just, completely being derelict of duty. That's just completely gone, and there's just no argument now for any kind of work from office mandated culture. I mean, who needs that? Like, it's just, who needs a commute that's like, what, 20, 30% of your day? And often you're just trying to get work done anyway. So there's not like the need to be there isn't just so compelling anymore.
I do think there'll be a generational shift because I don't see boomers and Gen Xers, which I'm a part of, leaning so much into the work from home, obviously, unless you have no choice. But do you see, Gen Z, millennials, when they start to, take over businesses and create, do you see that being more prevalent where people are working, from home 4 days a week and coming to the office once a week? Can you see that in the future?
Oh, I see that in the very near future. Yeah, I mean, our own policies around this are going to shift. I think we'll probably try to sort of mandate 2 days a week where we're all trying to be together and, put all our kind of face-to-face meetings and regular stuff into those 2 days, group meetings and all of that, so that we can sort of do the high bandwidth stuff together. And then most people will probably work from home and use these tools to basically fill in the gap.
We'll probably be retired by then, hopefully. Hopefully there's a world we can still go to work 5 days a week. I'm very old school.
Yes.
It is kind of nice to be like, hey, I'm just going to, leave your home for 8 hours a day. It's not the worst thing in the world, outside of a pandemic.
Right. But speaking as a, Gen Xer, I hate my commute. I mean, I'm doing an hour each way to get to the office, and in Seattle, like, traffic has just been like this constantly disintegrating hell. And it's just not enjoyable, like, to do. And there really has to be a kind of payoff. Like, I'm going to meet with people, and there has to be some real kind of reason to get up in the morning, because
you have to motivate yourself to go into work, even though it's your company.
Yeah. No, it's sort of like, that's kind of crazy, right? And it's like, well, why are you doing it? I mean, when we started Artefact, Gavin and I were both very much in the spirit of, well, if there's any day where you don't want to come, that's your fault. And I think the commute is really all I'm addressing here. It's just grading is a thing, and I don't miss it at all.
All right, last question. Last month, you wrote an article for Forbes called "Designing a Virtual Community in the Age of Isolation." You mentioned that one business was positioned to thrive in the age of isolation. It's Peloton. Are there any other companies that you think have been set up to succeed in this, which I hate the phrase, but this new normal? Are there any other companies that have really, been one step ahead of everybody else when it comes to this?
Not as many as you'd think. I mean, this is kind of an interesting tangent here, but like, if you think of like the Zooms of the world, right, are clearly major benefactors of isolation and remote work. And you'd think that some of these tech companies, for example, would have seen some reality like this and designed the future with this in mind. Like, there's remarkably few tools and options even for people. I mean, there are 1,000 platforms where you can have a video conversation, but like, try running a class, like a school class with 30 students, and having one-on-one time and then group time, and then, and then breaking up into little groups to do activities. And you suddenly realize these tools aren't very good. Like, they're awful. And I think educational institutions, which have been struggling to get online education right for years, suddenly realize that these platforms they're just awful. They're not kind of like consumer grade. They're not very sophisticated. So I'm so surprised at the lack of good tools and good companies that are kind of like really thriving now.
It sounds like everyone's got a little piece of something that works, right? Because you have the Zoom, you have the G chats, you have Slack. There's all little elements of it out there, but there's no one company has sort of married it all together.
Yeah, and if you're a knowledge worker, which is 40% of the U.S. workforce are people who work like you and I here, sort of largely laptop centric, and then knowledge exchange is basically what we're doing. For those individuals, we're like battling all of the communication channels. We're now, there's like 14 different ways for us to say the same thing to one another, and all of them are live. And it's like, there's comments in this tool I need to pay attention to that are different from that tool, and I can't remember which tool was where somebody said that thing, and you spend some time fishing around. Anyway, I think that's one of the things when we look out into the future and think about like the design of new tools, application services, the sort of desire for like boundaryless silos is like a really you hear people talk about it all the time. It's sort of like there's just too many places and too many ways to do almost the same thing, and we just constantly shifting between 1,000 gazillion apps, and that's actually making. And there's sort of another point here. It's actually making the work of doing good AI a lot harder. Like if you say, to Siri or Cortana or Alexa, schedule a meeting with Joe next Tuesday, what it does is it puts a meeting with Joe next Tuesday on whatever calendar it defaulted to, instead of actually doing what you actually want it to do, which is negotiate with Joe a time to meet next Tuesday, if he can. And just come back to me and put that on my calendar and figure out the Zoom connection and do all of the things that you need to happen. And which Joe, by the way? Was it Joe? Which of your 5 Joes?
Don't bring that up. Every time I tell Alexa to call my mother, it's like, do you mean your... I'm like, yes, obviously I mean my mother. I mean, don't ask me that. But hey, listen, I can't complain. It's so funny. I'll close in this. As much as people are so concerned about data, then you have people like me who be like, listen, if it makes my life easier, I don't mind if you have my data. You know what I mean? I guess there's probably a way to come up with a happy medium, because I love the fact that Amazon can suggest something for me to buy because it knows my history, or Google knows something I'm going to be interested in because I've searched this item.
Well, convenience as a trade-off for privacy is basically the problem. Like everybody sees the utility of like, hey, look, better recommendations. Awesome. That's pure value for me to stick with this particular provider or whatever. And that is a real value to a lot of people. What they're giving up, though, is a little intangible, a little abstract, and somewhere off in the future. And we're just not, as humans, really built to be concerned about that at all. Like, that's whatever. Yeah, that's just not immediate value of some kind. But someday you have to pay that bill. It's too big a kind of scary story to kind of keep ignoring, unfortunately. And the convenience factor is the thing that stops it being a headline.
One thing we can say that never caused any harm was Clippy. So I will,
no, it caused a lot of harm.
As much as we talked about this, it's only caused harm to your, eventual obituary. Outside of that, it did a world of good for people trying to use their Microsoft Office. Rob, I want to thank you for the time. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for telling me about what you're doing and what Artefact is doing these days. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck and stay safe out there, okay?
Thanks, Joe. It was great. It was a great conversation. Cheers.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.